we have found that people who vote for Donald Trump, by and large, are voting for Donald Trump. And it's difficult at this point for anybody who's been awake for the last decade not to have a very, very vivid idea of who Donald Trump is. When 77 million people voted for him in November of 2024, the large majority of them had a good sense of who they were voting for. Our research shows that lots of people really, really want what he represents. If people can't believe that the culture war is real and that it's being fought very hard on one side of the spectrum, if they can't believe that it's real, can they commit to resisting? People will suffer. Will they fight back? That's the question that really interests me.
Welcome to episode 251 of the Refuse Fascism podcast, a podcast brought to you by volunteers with Refuse Fascism. I'm Sam Goldman, one of those volunteers and host of the show. Refuse Fascism works to unite all who can be united, to join in mass, nonviolent protest and resistance in the streets and throughout society, growing to include millions and refusing to stop until we create such a profound political crisis that Trump cannot impose his fascist program or even maintain his hold on power. Big thanks to our patrons, everyone who rates, reviews, shares the show, and reps our merch. Every bit helps connect more people with Refuse Fascism. If you haven't yet, take a second to leave a review, share the show, or hit up our merch store. Of course, after you listen to today's show. Today, we're sharing two interviews. First, you'll hear from sociologist David N. Smith, a professor at the University of Kansas, discussing the relationship between Trump and his followers. And then we'll share an excerpt of a conversation between two leaders of Refuse Fascism, Sunsara Taylor and Paul Street, discussing next Saturday, June 14th, Trump's birthday military parade and the need to join mass protests. That interview originally aired earlier this week on WPFW, Liberation on Our Minds radio show. But first, this week in fascism, there is the white supremacist xenophobic travel ban in effect, banning people from 12 countries from entering the United States, people from Afghanistan, Myanmar, Chad, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Haiti, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. And Pride Month starting off with the purging of trans military members. Then there is the fight between Trump and Musk, where we must cheer for both of them to lose through taking action now to refuse fascism. This week, the Trump regime rescinded a Biden-era guidance that used a federal law to require hospitals to perform emergency abortions, even in states where abortions are illegal. In doing this, Trump co-signed the death of women nationwide. And this week, NBC News reported that ICE arrested more immigrants Tuesday than any other single day in its history, detaining more than 2,200 people, hundreds of whom had been enrolled in ICE's alternative to detention program. You see, ICE has a new, horrific tactic of arresting migrants as they come to their appointments at immigration courts. This regime is so skilled at finding new depths to their depravity. And this week, Kilmar Abrego Garcia was transferred back into U.S. custody and returned to the country nearly 3 months after he was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. Upon his return, Abrego Garcia is expected to face criminal charges for allegedly transporting undocumented migrants within the U.S. Since April, the Trump regime has refused to facilitate Abrego Garcia's release, despite a Supreme Court order blaming El Salvador for not wanting to release him. Today, however, we want to focus on the ICE raids that have swept blue cities this past week.
Jesus fucking Christ! What the fuck? Oh, God, yeah.
Estamos aquí contigo. Ponte en silencio, compañero. No necesitas firmar nada.
What does this sound like? A war zone? A torture chamber? Some future dystopia? It's the sound of fascism. It's the sound of June 2025, the Trump regime delivering on their white supremacist, xenophobic promise of ethnic cleansing through mass deportations, tearing through immigrant communities, using deceit and violence to shatter families and futures. As this regime advances their program in vicious ICE raids across the country, they have been met with heroic protests, people leaving work in suits and rushing out of their house in pajamas and flip-flops to put their bodies on the line to defend their neighbors. This shows that there are decent people in this country who do refuse to accept fascism, who will act for humanity, not just for themselves alone. And this must grow dramatically and quickly. We must also be real. This is what fascism looks like. This is how it works. They break laws openly. They terrorize the vulnerable. They criminalize protests. They rule by fear and force. And here, this is key. They will keep going unless and until we stop them. Unless and until the ones issuing the orders are removed from power. What we've seen thus far as horrific and brutal, as lawless and cruel, is only their beginning, and we can't let them write their ending. This is why now is the time for mass, relentless, nonviolent, and determined protests demanding the Trump fascist regime must go now, stopping business as usual and not relenting until this demand is won. Last week, the regime announced, as we reported on last week on the show, a new quota of 3,000 ICE arrests a day, aiming to triple arrest rates of immigrants and refugees. And this week, we saw the regime attempting to deliver on that. Quote-unquote, Operation at Large has redirected thousands of federal agents across multiple agencies into ICE's mission of ethnic cleansing. The operation even calls for the involvement of over 20,000 National Guard troops, according to details obtained by NBC News. At the beginning of the week, DHS published an error-filled list of municipalities they claimed were obstructing immigration officials, painting whole cities and towns as enemies. In Massachusetts, over 1,500 people have been rounded up in the last few weeks. In Milford, they seized Marcelo Gomez de Silva, a high school junior who's been in the U.S. since he was 6. We got a note here that his classmates and his whole community rose to his support in walkouts and sustained protest, and he has since been released. In San Diego, heavily armed ICE agents raided an Italian restaurant in the middle of the dinner rush. In Chicago, people were summoned by immigration authorities to a procedural check-in, only to be rounded up and callously snatched away by masked men with automatic weapons. Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez said, quote, "What we saw today is Gestapo-style abductions happening in front of all of us," end quote. In New York City, immigrant families showing up at ICE headquarters for scheduled appointments were ushered into unmarked cars and vans, disappeared into ICE detention. We know of these stories because everyday people found out, dropped everything, and confronted these raids. It is unclear the extent of operations ICE and their partners have undertaken across the country, but clearly their focus now is on Los Angeles.
You told me you got caught up in the tear gas as well. Describe what happened to you.
Oh, just tasted a little tear gas. Tasted like fascism.
Where in Paramount, this is Trump's armed Gestapo attacking the people who are standing up against the immigrants being kidnapped.
As Trump's mass deportation machine surges ahead, extremely violent, military-style ICE raids have taken place in Los Angeles. ICE, DHS, FBI, DEA coordinated to unleash hell beginning this past Friday morning, rolling in armored trucks and militarized squadrons of agents armed to the teeth with assault rifles and body armor to kidnap dishwashers, garment workers, day laborers. They were met with defiant and brave protesters who stood strong despite tear gas and quote-unquote less lethal ammunition. Feds running over protesters who were standing up to militarized police as DHS rounds up communities. We salute all who have put their bodies on the line to defend the lives and rights of immigrants out in LA and across the country. During one of the raids, Deva Huerta, president of SEIU California and SEIU United Service Workers West, was injured and then arrested while witnessing a raid. California State Senator Scott Weinert described the situation like this, quote, "This is what fascism looks like. Secret police raids, injuring protesters, arresting labor leaders," end quote. The people who have come out in the thousands to stop this assault have risked their lives to do so and have been met with violence and threats of greater force. You have Stephen Miller likening the situation to an insurrection. Trump declaring, quote, "If Governor Gavin Newsom of California and Mayor Karen Bass of Los Angeles can't do their jobs, which everyone knows they can't, then the federal government will step in and solve the problem. Riots and looters, the way it should be solved," end quote. And border czar Tom Homan declaring this.
"We're not going to apologize for doing it. We're stepping up." She says they're going to mobilize. Well, guess what? We're already ahead of the game. We're already mobilizing. We're going to bring National Guard in tonight. We're going to continue doing our job. We're going to push back on these people, and we're going to force the law.
Right now, the Trump fascist regime has seized control of California's National Guard against the will of the governor so that ICE can carry out mass roundups of immigrants unimpeded. They arrived last night, 2,000 Guard members on the ground now. In the midst of all of this, we heard from Todd Lyons, the acting director of ICE, whining into the camera. Lyons pleads.
"These are real people with real families you're hurting with your ridiculous rhetoric and inflammatory comments. And it's time to remember that."
These are real people? What the fuck is he talking about? Yes, the immigrants you're snatching up are real people with real lives. That is the problem. But this guy is out here trying to play an Uno reverse card in real life, claiming that the ICE agents, the callous, violent, masked, and armed men cruelly dragging people into business park dungeons are quote-unquote real people. Not only is this turning reality on its head, but it is using the language of empathy to literally dehumanize the immigrants and refugees these quote-unquote real people are brutalizing. Meanwhile, Tom Homan is out there claiming that ICE agents, federal officials ostensibly accountable to the people, are masking up because they're scared of getting doxxed. Yes, this snot-nosed, snivelly fascism, steeped in the lexicon of compassion while purged of any real human feeling or connection beyond entitled grievance. Therapy talk fascism is still fascism and must be defeated all the same. And Secretary of Defense Hegseth, he's threatening to send in the Marines against civilians. So, quick note to active duty troops, you can call the GI Rights Hotline if you are being ordered to quote-unquote violate the rights of U.S. citizens, 877-447-4487. And you do not have to comply with fascist orders. So, in summary, no ICE, no National Guard, no fascist terror against immigrants. The Trump fascist regime must go now. This is not about being unafraid. It's about refusing to let fear stop us. Because even in fear, we can choose bravery. We can choose courage. Now is not a time for compliance, but for bold, visible defiance. Not a time to act for ourselves alone, but in the name of humanity. Immigrants are full human beings. We say no more dehumanization, no more deportations, no more terror. Not one more child ripped from their parents' arms. Not one more student coming home to an empty house. Not one more family forced to live in constant fear. We must act and act together. We must rise up in our millions and demand Trump must go. This whole fascist regime must go now. Every day that the Trump fascist regime remains in power, the more horror it inflicts on people here and around the world. These horrors escalate each week, and our window to stop them narrows. We have to oppose this campaign of ethnic cleansing against our immigrant siblings with everything we've got, and do so while aiming to defeat this fascism, because this will not stop until this regime is stopped. The regime must be driven from power through nonviolent but relentless protests of millions demanding Trump must go now. So this is a summer we need to turn up the heat, stay in the streets. Now with that, here is my interview with David. Today, I am so glad to be speaking with David N. Smith. David is a sociology professor at the University of Kansas, where his research focuses on why do people differ in their attitudes towards democracy and equality, and the topic of today, why and how Donald Trump follows his followers. Welcome, David. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
I guess I want to start here. As obvious as it may be, I feel like it's always worth reminding Americans that Hitler did not carry out the Holocaust single-handedly. It was not the result of some detailed master plan orchestrated by one person. it was not the result of one maniacal genius. Millions were involved in carrying out. And yet fascism demands a strong leader. And I'm hoping you could give us more of a sense of what is the relationship between Trump and his base that most of us have a hard time wrapping our heads around. What is that relationship between a base that Hitler could only have imagined the size and strength of Trump's base, but then there's Trump the leader? Like, what's the relationship between the base and the leader?
Well, clearly there's a very powerful relationship, but the argument that I make with my collaborator, Eric Hanley, and this is drawn from social scientific research we've been doing for a long time. The argument we make is that the causal arrow goes in the opposite direction from what people typically think. There's a general tendency to believe that the leader persuades people to think the way the leader thinks. And our research indicates that Trump in particular is a master marketer. I've actually done a lot of research on how the marketing community views Trump, and they are kind of awestruck by his ability to channel what they call his target market wants. You successfully market by saying what the people you're trying to reach want to hear. And so one of the things that was really evident in the early journalistic reporting on Trump's campaign back in 2015 and 2016 was that over and over again, people at his rallies and interviewed by journalists, they would say, he says what I think. And our research began before Trump was a candidate. We actually have some very good data going back to the 2012 election. And what our research showed is that saying what his followers wanted to think is Trump's craft. I mean, he's an artisan when it comes to basically extending his antennae, getting a sense of what it is his potential voters want to hear, and then telling them what they want to hear colorfully, creatively, with variety, in an entertaining way, in a way that works for them. Our research indicates that the wish for somebody like Trump saying the kinds of things that he says and does, that wish preceded him. I can tell you a little bit about the 2012 election if you like.
Yeah, go there.
Basically, the research that we do is survey research, and this is different than ordinary polling. I know from a lot of experience that people tend to think of surveys and polls as being more or less the same thing. But in reality, a survey of the type that we work with a large number of people and a large number of questions on the survey, statistically analyze that survey enables you to say deeper and more complicated things about how people feel and what they say. So the basic premise of the kind of survey that we conduct is that when people express themselves on one subject, the statistical analysis that we're able to do gives us a very strong sense of the association between different kinds of ideas. So the wish for somebody who exercises a dictatorial power, what we call the wish for a domineering leader, is strongly associated with a wide variety of other social attitudes. And the statistical analysis enables us to basically determine the strength of the association. So a lot of negative attitudes towards feminists, for example, go along with the current wish for a domineering leader, which Trump has catalyzed. So Eric and I began the process that led to this moment way back in 2006, when we reached out to an organization called the American National Election Study, the ANES, which we sometimes just call the NES. This is the American National Election Study. They've been circulating surveys of voters in presidential and other elections, midterm elections, since 1948, every 2 years since 1948. A very old, established mechanism for ascertaining what people think. We felt in the early 2000s that there were some questions that could be asked by the NES that would tap into the wish for a domineering leader in a way that had not been true before. And there are a number of items that we proposed to them. Two of the items that we asked them to include have really stood the test of time and really stand out. One of these asks basically states that the country would be better off with a strong leader who would, quote unquote, get rid of the rotten apples who are ruining everything. And the other item says that the country will be great again if we have a strong leader who will take action to crush evil. In the shorthand of our conversations about this, we refer to these as the rotten apples and crush evil items. And you might think that those items did not necessarily distinguish, like, say, Trump voters from others, but in fact, in the 2016 version of the American National Election Study, they very strongly were associated with the propensity to vote for Trump and a whole range of other attitudes. The point I began with, though, is that these items were proposed by us and accepted in 2011, which means that they were included in the 2012 election survey. And so this was Romney versus Obama for people who may not have been paying attention at the time or not old enough to pay attention. And Romney is a much more mainstream Republican candidate than Trump has certainly proven to be. But Romney voters wanted a domineering leader. It was very clear that the rotten apples question, get rid of the rotten apples, and the crush evil question drew a bright line between people who wanted Romney versus those who wanted Obama. Those items were strongly associated with all kinds of negative opinions about minorities and Muslims and others as well. So I'm happy to elaborate further, but what thoughts do you have at this point?
One of the things that I think people have a really hard time with is confronting the fact that so many, not the majority by any means, but that so many people, their neighbors, the people that sit next to them at church and at the diner and are the parents of their children's classmates, have these ideas. That is a very hard thing to confront, that there are this many people in this country that feel that way. For the majority of our listeners, they can see that Trump is a fascist, that he is driving the world really headlong into environmental catastrophe, that he's unleashing the most base and vile and cruel elements in society, misogyny, white supremacy, xenophobia, and more, and really from any constraints. And people, are like, it's so easy to hate him. It's so easy to be repulsed by everything that he does. And so maybe can you give us some more insight into what Trump's base actually thinks about Trump? Maybe after that, what's the value in understanding that?
Well, I think the value in understanding it, just to start with that, is to know what we're up against. I mean, so if we're in a phase of what appears to be very acute authoritarianism from the top, how do we resist? And how can we effectively resist? And our feeling is that the way to do that is to really understand the situation. The point you began with is something that I encounter in conversations all the time. It's extremely discouraging and difficult for a great many people to think that people who are voting for Trump in the majority of instances with their eyes open, knowing who he is and knowing what he stands for. But the conclusion we have come to as a result of our research back in 2012, 2016, and since, and then the research conducted by others with some of these very same items, our conclusion is, it sounds like a tautology, but I think it's not just that. We have found that people who vote for Donald Trump, by and large, are voting for Donald Trump. And it's difficult at this point for anybody who's been awake for the last decade not to have a very, very, very vivid idea of who Donald Trump is. He's been blasting his image, blasting his words into our eyes and ears day after day, week after week, year after year. Nobody is better known than Donald Trump. So when 77 million people voted for him in November of 2024, the large majority of them had a good sense of who they were voting for, had at least a pretty rough general idea of what he stands for and what he was likely to do. Now, I think everybody has been surprised by the speed and extremity of his attack on civil society. I mean, it feels as if he's pouring acid on all the institutions of civil society. And I think people expected a serious assault, but the extent of the assault, the speed of the assault is surprising even to those of us who were anticipating it. The question then is, what are we really facing henceforward? On the one hand, we have Trump. On the other hand, what we can call Trumpism. And Trumpism may or may not be the motive for voting for him for a good many people. So he had 77 million votes. He had over 60 million way back in 2016 and 74 million in 2020. He has had cumulatively over 220 million votes cast for him. It's a very impressively large number of votes. And the number has grown from election to election. Back in 2016, when we reviewed the American National Election Study data, we found that about 3/4 of his voters regarded themselves as his strong supporters. And that's about 37 or 38% of the electorate as a whole. And that seems to be the really solid, hard core of Trump's support. So about 3 out of 4. That doesn't mean by any means that everybody who votes for him agrees with his whole agenda. And, his whole agenda is so hard for many people to swallow right now that he's undoubtedly losing independents and others who may have voted for him without wanting the whole package of what he offers. But the difficult result of our research and thinking on this subject, which a great many people do not accept and will not agree with, the general result is that a high percentage of people who support Trump, who vote for him, do that precisely because of what he says and does, not despite what he says and does. So many people hope that people are casting votes for him for miscellaneous reasons, that they want the rate of inflation to go down. That was something a lot of people said when a poll in October of last year indicated that inflation seemed to be a major concern. I don't think that poll told us a very deep truth about the electorate. What our research found back in 2016 and what we have learned since is that everybody wants the economy to go well. It's not distinctive of Trump voters. People who vote against Trump want the economy to go well. So questions about the economy don't distinguish. Questions about the culture war and about having a domineering leader who will lead the charge in the culture war do distinguish.
That's really helpful. I think that there's so much energy put into trying to kind of hear out the Trump base because so many people are thinking, oh, it's being driven by economic grievance. And if that's the case, yes, hearing that out, there'd be room for that if that's what was driving it. But if what's motivating people isn't economic grievance, but that Trump hates the same people you do, then there's the notion that you're going to just be able to reconcile with them without it being completely on their terms is a dangerous path, I think. And I wanted your thoughts on more of how you see the implications of the understanding of this research versus, people thinking, oh, his base is just worried about the economy.
I mean, a lot of the Democratic strategists right now are definitely making that argument. And their rationale is straightforward from their standpoint. I mean, they're thinking entirely electorally and very rationally. They're looking at the midterms in 2026, and they know that if they can swing 5 or 6 congressional districts, then the balance of power in Congress will shift. And at the very least, Trump can be prevented from wreaking further damage, in about 15 months? A lot could happen between now and then. If that's your primary focus, which is an understandable focus, then finding a way to peel away a few Trump voters has an obvious appeal. I don't think that makes perfect sense, though, even on its own terms, because if you look at the difference between the vote that Kamala Harris got in 2024 and Joe Biden got in 2020, she got 7 million fewer votes. And as far as I can tell, the data is not 100% clear, but as far as I can tell, not very many millions of Biden voters turned to Trump. Most of those 7 million basically just didn't vote. In purely narrowly electoral terms, I think it's a mistake to try to peel away people who actually voted for Trump once, especially in 2024, when we had at that point already nearly a decade of very clear information about who he was, what he says, what he appears to mean. Peeling away a few people who might have voted for him out of a mistaken sense of their economic self-interest could work to a small extent. But my sense is that the Democratic electorate, like the Republican electorate, cares about the culture war, cares about whether or not civil rights and civil liberties remain in effect or are crushed. I think just even in electoral terms, reaching out to the people who haven't yet voted because they were too young or didn't vote because they weren't enthusiastic enough last time, that seems like a more credible electoral option. But I'm personally only a little bit interested in the electoral dimension of this, because if we're right, and if Trumpism is a reality, that's not just a number of people who voted, but it's an actual MAGA movement, then that MAGA movement, which our data suggests existed before Trump entered the political sphere, and is very, very likely to exist for a good long period of time after he departs the political stage. What we're contending with is Trumpism, and it's a very wonderfully humane impulse that people have to try to reach across the aisle, to try to find common ground, all of the kinds of humane things that many really good-hearted liberals want to do. I certainly support the wish to empathize with and not demonize the people who are on the other side of some of these issues. But if there is a constituency that is fighting in a way that damages civil rights for anyone, it infringes civil liberties for anyone, then empathy only gets us an inch or two along the path. I think that what's necessary is a serious attempt to push back, a serious attempt to have the kind of mass movement that will defend civil rights and civil liberties. Obviously, there are a lot of people, particularly at the leadership of the Democratic Party, who want to sort of back away from that fight. I think James Carville famously said that liberals should just play dead. I think that was the exact phrase he used, and hope all this blows over and that what Trump does will alienate so many people that he'll simply lose the 2026 midterms and then not succeed with whatever he's planning for 2028. But playing dead is a recipe for being dead, I think.
The point you were making about empathy, sometimes I feel so much frustration that there's these banks and banks of empathy amongst the decent people for the MAGA movement, the people within the MAGA movement. But where is that empathy right now for all those that are being targeted by this movement? That take all the energy that you are putting into wanting to win over, to bring to their senses, to come around, to see the light, and put that empathy into those that are right now being totally bulldozed by this regime. That's kind of how I see it. People's intentions and the idea behind it is good. It's good that people don't want people to be sucked into this nightmare. But I think that one of the ways that you do pull people away, to the degree that we can pull people away, those who are really deeply entrenched in that movement, they're not going to move. But those who can be pulled away, it's going to be our actions that pull them away. And by our actions, I mean a mass nonviolent movement. That's going to be what eventually pulls people away, not trying to win people over one by one, in my opinion.
I mean, obviously, we're all just individuals. So talking to people one-to-one is a daily reality that we all experience. And it's very valid to try to, talk to your coworkers, talk to other people in your daily life and thrash through some of these issues. Finger pointing and name calling don't get us very far. My collaborator and I tend to shy away from labels. There's no real point in labeling people. The goal here is to understand. And if our understanding is that, say, 3/4 of the people who vote for Trump vote for him because they really want what he says, and they really want and applaud what he does. A recent poll showed that a lot of people who voted for Trump in November of 2024 call themselves excited right now because he appears to be living up to his promises. He's not just all talk. As much as we might empathize with whatever it is that motivates people to hold those views, if those views lead them to strong participation in the kind of culture war and, to a certain extent, class war that we're experiencing right now, the only way to protect civil liberties is to stand up for them. And the only way to protect the civil rights of all of the various groups who are under assault right now is to really stand up for them. And if there is a serious effort to resist, a serious effort to restore and defend genuine democratic norms from the bottom up, people who can be won to that perspective are being given an opportunity to see the virtues of that kind of effort, that kind of resistance, and the kind of solidarity that's possible in that context. So that's our hope. If working really hard at basically an impossible enterprise, which is to win over people who actually really, really strongly support Trump, that is energy misspent. I mean, the way that you were saying, far better to build ties with those who either already want to defend democracy or are listening with their ears open and want to participate in the conversation.
As we close out this conversation, I was wondering, what are the questions that you think are worth exploring now? Where are you going to go next with your research? And what are the questions that you think people need to be asking?
Well, I will say that we've written a fair number of articles, and we're actually working on a couple more right now because there's new information that's coming in all the time and that we're able to access. But actually, the question that interests me most is not so much why people vote for Trump or support him with real enthusiasm. It's exactly the question you raised. I'm interested in why people of liberal goodwill can't believe that the motives are the ones we're describing, can't believe that anybody would really, really want what Trump says and really, really want what he does. We think that it's clearly the case that there are many millions of people who hold those views and are applauding at this very moment. And the difficulty that so many people who could resist have in accepting that is a huge impediment. If people can't believe that the culture war is real and that it's being fought very hard on one side of the spectrum, if they can't believe that it's real, can they commit to resisting? From a research standpoint, this is actually a pretty difficult challenge. I mean, the kind of research that I need to do that others could do to better understand the kind of almost denial that exists, the disbelief that anyone really, really wants what Trump represents. Our research shows that lots of people really, really want what he represents. And there are certainly a good many people who have voted for him once or twice who don't accept the full agenda. There are people who can be peeled away or who will be spontaneously disaffected when they see the harm that he's doing, and that harm is going to grow. I mean, I think you and I agree that it can't help but grow as the kind of assault that the government is waging against the vulnerable, the poor, the sick, those of us who will have measles, those of us who will have COVID, and all the other things that are going to be the result of the cancellation of medical care and research and so on. People will suffer. Will they fight back? That's the question that really interests me.
And just one follow-up question off of that, will they fight back? I think is so connected to people really confronting the danger. And as you said, part of the danger being that it's not just one man, it's this base. The MAGA movement is a real thing. I'm wondering, from the research you've done so far, is there anything that consistently moves people in their understanding to grasp this reality that people do want this? It doesn't have to be this way, but this is the way it is right now.
Well, I think the experience of the last decade, I think the Trumps came down the famous golden escalator in July of 2015. So we're about a month away from the 10th anniversary. A great deal of the liberal public has been in a state of growing cognitive dissonance over the years. And so you and I have heard the question asked countless times, what explains this? How can people vote for Donald Trump? How can they see and hear him and still vote for him? What I said earlier is that a lot of people have wanted to believe that they're voting for him despite what he says and does. But my reading of the situation is that he has found what people want him to say. Tens of millions of people want him to say, want him to promise, and want him to do. And it's because he says what they already thought, because he's actually now doing, in many respects, what many of them have wanted, that they support him. And so seeing this month after month, year after year is having a disorienting effect for a lot of people who initially just couldn't believe that anybody really would want what Trump represents. I'm obviously not advocating any kind of satisfaction in the extremity of the moment, but the more extreme the administration becomes on so many different fronts, if in fact over the course of the next months or year or two, there isn't a lot of buyer's remorse among people who voted for him, I think that is going to force people who are taking this issue seriously to rethink. A great many of them still find one way or another to disbelieve that the MAGA movement is a real movement and that it pre-existed Trump. Trump has managed to sort of capture it and make it his own vehicle. But the kinds of views that he expresses exist fully blown, for example, in Greg Abbott's Texas, in the Florida of Ron DeSantis. This is not just a national issue. It's not just a question of this one particular leader. There's a MAGA reality pretty much across the map. Seeing that and seeing it remain relatively constant up until this point and even growing. Many, many people were shocked to see Donald Trump get 77 million votes in the last election. I think that's the second highest vote total any presidential candidate has ever gotten. And again, this came 8 years after his first election, 8 years of very long and difficult history that people have experienced, personally. People remember the COVID crisis. They remember Trump's role in that crisis. They remember so many other things. And yet 77 million people pulled the levers. When people think hard about what that reality represents, I think they are likelier than before to question their previous assumption that no one could really want this.
Thank you so much, David. And for people that want to read more of your work, where should we direct people to?
Well, there's a wonderful resource that a lot of people don't know about. I'm not advertising for Google. That's certainly not my motive. But Google does have a resource called Google Scholar. If you just type in the phrase Google Scholar, it will appear. And you can type in the name of an author or type in the name of an article or a book. And in many instances, not certainly with respect to everything that I've written, but in many instances, there are paths to the material you're looking for, downloadable PDFs or things of that sort. The first article that Eric and I wrote was called The Anger Games, an article that I published last year called The Agitator Supplies What the Base Demands is another of those papers. And we'll be publishing more. So people just keep their eyes and ears out for further news about this. And of course, there are a lot of other people doing good research. I mean, we are piggybacking onto the work of a lot of other very accomplished social scientists as well. So I want to basically applaud everyone who has done good work in this realm.
Thank you so much. We'll put some links in as well to some of those articles.
But it's really nice talking to you.
As we shared last week, refusefascism.org is mobilizing to oppose Trump's military parade in D.C. on Saturday, June 14th at 1 p.m. at Logan Circle, marching to the White House. Yesterday, on Saturday, June 7th, we held a rally and press conference in front of the White House announcing our plans. We encourage you to check out some of the highlights from the variety of speakers that participated by taking a look at our Instagram at Refuse Fascism. Here is Sunsara Taylor, a national leader of Refuse Fascism, speaking in front of the White House.
Donald Trump is throwing himself a fascist birthday bonanza. He's going to have the U.S. military parade through the streets of Washington, D.C. like a tyrant, like a fascist leader that he is and that he wants the world to see. And we in refusefascism.org are so thrilled that across the country, over 700 cities, people have declared what? No kings. No King's Day, indivisible, other groups are protesting, and this is righteous, and we stand with them. At the same time, a lot of these groups have said, but don't protest in Washington, D.C.
Why?
Don't give them attention here in Washington, D.C. And we have said, with respect, we have to be here in D.C., standing up right in the seat of power where this fascist parade is going down. Now, we're going to be permitted. We're going to be nonviolent. We're not going to be provoked. We're going to be disciplined, but we are going to be serious. Serious as a heart attack. Serious as fascism coming to power in the most powerful military empire that has ever existed in all of human history. At a time when immigrants are being snatched up by the day, out of elementary school graduations, parents disappearing, students being detained and disappeared for writing op-eds, lawyers and judges and Congress people being arrested and charged. This is fascism coming to this country. And you do not stop it by standing down and letting them not get a response. Don't give them attention. You stop it by standing up. Donald Trump is trying to send a message to the world next weekend. He's trying to let the whole world see his fascist military loyal to him, not to the rule of law, loyal to him, not to the Constitution. And he wants to send a message of intimidation and terror to people of this country and people around the world. And people need to see right here in the streets of D.C. an opposite message, a message of courage, not fear, of large-mindedness for humanity, not bigotry and hatred. They need to see people standing up and inspiring and giving strength to the tens of millions of decent people across this country who did not vote for Trump, who are horrified by what he's doing, who hate every day opening the newspaper and seeing more crimes, and who are despairing that there's something they can do to stop this. But there is something they can do. It is building a movement in the streets to demand that Trump must go now. This is how dictators are deposed, through the power of the people, non-violently but determinedly in the streets. And that is what we are contributing to next weekend, July 14th at 1 p.m., Logan Square, here in Washington, D.C., gathering, refusefascism.org, and everybody who wants to stand with us to march non-violently down here to the White House to say hell no to Donald Trump's military parade, to say in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America, and say it with me, Trump must go now. Trump must go now.
To discuss this parade and the protests more, have a listen to Sunsara Taylor and Paul Street, two leaders of Refuse Fascism. This conversation was recorded and aired earlier this week on WPFW, Liberation on Our Minds radio show. To listen to the full conversation, see the show notes.
This is Sunsara Taylor, and I'm so happy to be with you this evening as your guest host here on WPFW's Liberation on Our Minds. It's been too long, and I'm happy to be back, and I have so much to share with you this evening and to open up the phone lines and discuss. We are broadcasting at one of the heaviest moments in the history of this country, and really at a crucial turning point in the history of the world. Never before in a country that is this powerful, this dominant in the world, has a fascist regime accelerated towards consolidation so rapidly. We're facing Trump MAGA fascism. Trump 1.0, the first regime, was a horror show. He accelerated towards fascism. He committed crimes, atrocities against people here and around the world, but he also ran up against guardrails and obstacles, most of which have been removed or which he is actively shattering right now. The courts, if they rule against him, he's ignoring them. Public opinion, public universities, anything that's in his way, he is bulldozing past it and towards an absolute nightmare. And this is a dangerous thing, profoundly dangerous. And yet, in this country, there are so many people who are agonized, who are sick at heart, who are outraged, who are in the streets protesting, rising up, voicing their opposition, resisting within the institutions, that there is a profound fight that could be waged and could be won to prevent the consolidation of this fascism. This is what I'm talking about when I say we are at a juncture, a historical turning point, a pivot of momentous stakes. So we're going to get into some of this evening. I'm happy to introduce a guest who's going to be helping us explore this, examine this, talk about what needs to be done. His name is Paul Street. He is a historian and an educator, an academic, a writer, and he sits on the national editorial board of the organization refusefascism.org. Paul Street, welcome to Liberation on Our Minds.
Hey, Sunsara, great to be here and great to talk to some of your beautiful people out there in D.C. area.
That's right. So we have so much to get into. I mean, I just gave a sort of the briefest of situating where we are. I wonder if you want to take a minute and speak on how you see this moment, how you see the mission that people need to be on as a representative, a leader of Refuse Fascism.
Well, you mentioned the first administration, and your listeners might be curious to know that I wrote a book about that. It was called This Happened Here, Neoliberals, Amerikaners, and the Trumping of America. And I had to write a chapter in that book called The Anatomy of Fascism Denial, in which I took on like 18 different academics who just were insisting that this wasn't really fascism. And after January 6th and the second Trump administration, these folks I'm arguing with have pretty much had to surrender. They've had to give in. The debate is over. This is clearly fascism. This is clearly a combination of white supremacism, militant patriarchy and misogyny, and xenophobic nationalism, all tied together in a horrific bow with a regime that's attempting to overthrow previously normative democracy and rule of law and impose a dictatorship, okay, and to restore traditional oppressive values and institutions and roll back the clock of history, and pretty much not simply roll back, but an attempt to eliminate every civil, human, and social, and political, and environmental right that decent people hold dear. This is a militant juggernaut of radical counter-revolution that is literally trying to create a new dark ages and bring back with a vengeance the worst and darkest tendencies in American history. And it is a regime under Trump that we insist that Refuse Fascism has to go and has to go now. And that's why we are going to be in the streets and the public squares of Washington, D.C. on June 14th under the twin slogans: in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America, and the Trump fascist regime must go now.
Maybe you could talk a little bit. June 14th is Trump's birthday. It's Trump's military parade. That's the occasion of the June 14th protest you're describing, yes?
Absolutely. So June 14th, which has been proclaimed by Indivisible and 50501 and other liberal and more center organizations as No King's Day. Well, what that's about is a response to Trump holding a military parade. He dreamt about a military parade in his first administration. He fell in love with the notion of a military parade when he visited France and saw France's version on Bastille Day, July 14th. And they say it's the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army. It also happens to be Trump's birthday, and it is a symbolic epitome of what Judith Levine and at The Guardian, a very interesting author, has called a statement of the birth of a fascist America, with an expression of fealty towards the dear leader. The military march, which comes after our march and culminates in the evening, not far from the White House, is an expression of the military's loyalty to one man, to the authoritarian's charismatic leader, so-called charismatic leader, Donald Trump, as opposed to the rule of law. It's a very chilling moment, and I think it's an expression of the Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon fascist regime's attempt to create a sense of consolidation and entrenchment of their white nationalist regime. They've cowed Congress. They've cowed the judiciary. They've cowed the media. They've cowed the universities. They've cowed leading law firms, they think. They've cowed the federal bureaucracy and slashed away vast segments of the federal bureaucracy. And now they're looking to complete their statement of total control of the federal government by holding this kind of ritualistic expressions of the cowing and the incorporation of the military to the Trump agenda. And we say no to that, and we say screw that. And that is why we will be starting off in Logan Square in Washington, D.C. at 1 p.m. with a march that will continue on to the White House. It is not a direct confrontation with the Trump military parade. That's not what we're trying to do. It is strictly nonviolent. We'd like to have thousands of people in the streets for this, to stand up and say no to this horrific regime and its attempt to normalize itself and cement its rule and consolidate its power for the long term, indefinitely. And this is a bit different than the mainstream organizations, the protest organizations that we know about and we've heard about in the national media are saying about June 14th with their No King's Day. I think we're a little bit more of a No Führer's Day, No Fascist Strongman Day. But in any event, King is good too, because kings have absolute power, and they also don't care about judicial power, and they also attack legislative power, and they attack lawyers and all of that. But what's different is they have decided, they have said that they don't want to, and think probably folks shouldn't protest in Washington, D.C. on that day. They say that not holding protests in D.C. will deny Trump media attention and will deny him opportunity to militarily crush his opposition and all of this. We say, no, Washington, D.C. is the seat of national power. It's the headquarters and the seat of this new fascist regime that is trying to entrench itself, and that may entrench itself if we don't rise up against it. And we insist on the need for a statement of mass public resistance in Washington, D.C. itself. The media is going to be there. The other groups not holding protests in D.C. will not deny Trump media attention. The media is going to be there. The whole world is going to be watching. There will be reporters and cameras from all over the world, as well as the United States. And it's very important that a big, angry, righteous, and powerful mass of people are there in the seat of power to be seen and to be heard, saying, in the name of humanity, we refuse a fascist America, and the Trump regime must go now. And you can find out about this, I should say, at refusefascism.org. And you can sign up and RSVP and get involved and participate and carry signs and help do chants and bring posters or use posters that are already there and carry banners. And you use your creativity to make a statement that we don't want a fascist Führer in the United States of America.
Yeah, I think this June 14th military parade that Trump is throwing for himself, people say this is just an ego trip, and he does have an ego. You can't deny that it's a huge ego trip, but it's not just an ego trip. And then people say, it's a waste of tax dollars. It's going to be hugely expensive. It's like 7,000 troops and tanks and aircraft and a dog. I mean, the dog's not that expensive, but there's right. Yeah, it's funny. They always list the dog, but it's a big display of military might, and it's going to tear up the streets of DC. And so people complain about that, and that's legit. It's going to be destructive and wasteful and all of that, but it's not just destructive and wasteful. It's not a thing that is just wasteful. It is a leap in forging and displaying to the world the most powerful military in the world that is being refashioned into a fascist fighting and killing machine for Donald Trump. And, the U.S. military has carried out war crimes and crimes against humanity from the founding of this country down to today. Whether you want to talk about George Washington and the Sullivan expedition and the massacres of Native Americans in upstate New York, whether you want to talk about the unjust, illegitimate invasion that killed millions in Vietnam, whether you want to talk about the bombing of Cambodia, whether you want to talk about the death squads in Guatemala and throughout Latin America, whether you want to talk about the two wars and invasions in Iraq, killed and displaced the last war in Iraq, 5 million people, just descended the region into sectarian and more reactionary, woman-hating, fundamentalist, nightmare for the people there. Whether you want to talk about the U.S. backing, arming, funding, right, training, the genocide being carried out by Israel against the people of Gaza. So the U.S. military has carried it's in my view. Now, there's people who are very patriotic and believe in the military and oppose what Trump is doing to it. But in my view, it's dripping with the blood of the people of the world. That said, and I'm not a fan of the U.S. military, but that said, it's been a military that's loyal to the ruling class of this country. It's supposed to be loyal to the rule of law. Trump is trying to annihilate all of that and make a military that is loyal to him personally, not bound by the Constitution, not bound by the rule of law, bound by him and his white supremacist, woman-hating, anti-LGBT, hate America first animus towards the world and a military that's going to do his bidding. And I think people need to remember this is very profound and very dangerous. Remember in 2020, when there was a beautiful rising of millions, 16 million across this country against the police murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others, when people were rising up and chanting Black Lives Matter and demanding an end to the killing of Black and brown men and women and oppressed people at the hands of the police, demanding an end to institutionalized white supremacy, Donald Trump asked the military to shoot protesters. And the military said, no.
That's right.
You can't do that. You can't do that on U.S. soil. Well, he's purged the generals who were in his way. This is very serious. He has gotten the people out of the way. He's purged the leadership. This is what I'm saying. This military parade is not just symbolism. It's not just an ego trip. He's removed the leadership of the military. He's removed Black leaders. He's removed female leaders in the name of getting rid of DEI. And he's removed anybody who even gave lip service to overcoming discrimination within the military or in broader society. And he's bringing back Confederate generals to name the bases, the military bases. So this is somebody who's asserting a white supremacist, Christian fascist, woman-hating killing machine loyal to Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think that's 100% correct. I mean, and clearly Donald Trump is a monumentally diagnosable sociopathic malignant narcissist. I mean, but we all know that. I mean, to say he's on an ego trip every day of his life is an understatement. But this is about a lot more than that. It's sort of a capstone on this symbolic narrative of consolidation of control. We've got all these other institutions, and now we're going to finish it off with the military, thereby sort of proclaiming the birth of a new fascist state. But there's also the transformation of the military itself. There's a big leap going on in trying to remake the military. You know, the Trump fascist regime isn't trying to tear down the state. You hear that a lot. They want to tear down the government. No, they want to take it over, and they want to remake the state. And then they want to remake society along Christian, white, nationalist, patriarchal, nativist lines with that remade state. And part of that is remaking the military. And as you said, they have been purging Black leadership, female leadership. They're taking efforts, they're doing certain things to try and move Black and female and obviously trans soldiers out of the military. And I think what they're doing with all of that, and with things like wiping out all references to Black military heroes, on federal military websites, and renaming bases after Confederate generals, they are expressing in all of that the racism and the sexism that's at the heart of the fascist state that they want to create. They're trying to solidify their power with their white nationalist voting base and paramilitary base that's out there that likes to hear about the purging of women, trans, and people of color from the military. And they're trying to create a military that will be willing to do exactly what you said top military leaders were unable to, refused to do in response to the George Floyd rebellion. People wonder, how in the hell did Pete Hegseth keep his job after letting a leading centrist journalist in on a signal chat with military details being revealed? Well, Pete Hegseth kept his job because Trump wants him in there. Pete Hegseth is a Christian white nationalist. He's a member of a far-right evangelical church whose leading charismatic minister says that the best period in American race relations was slavery. Okay. Pete Hegseth is there precisely to do what the defense leaders would not do in the summer of 1920. Actually, 1920 was a pretty bad year too, by the way, but in the summer of 2020. Which is be ready to deploy against ordinary citizens and be ready to undertake a bloody response to mass protest. And at the same time, I think this is a very provocative move and opens up possibilities of dissent and division and conflict within the military that is full of people of color, that still has women in it, gay folks and trans folks who are not strong candidates to open fire on the next mass protesters in this country. And the next mass protesters could be about another racist police killing. They could be about this rising movement that's very interesting and hopeful against the immigration raids that are escalating in the last few weeks. It could be about any number of things, right? And the officers that come out of West Point and the Naval Academy, they swear an oath not to a man, not to a king, not to a Führer, not to an absolute ruler, but to the U.S. Constitution with all its imperfections, but nonetheless that involves checks and balances between different branches of government that the Trump fascists are trying to eliminate.
Thanks for listening to Refuse Fascism. Join me in DC on Saturday, June 14th, 1 p.m. at Logan Circle. Can't make it to DC? Join one of the over, 1,700 No Kings Day actions and raise the demand Trump must go now. Visit refusefascism.org for resources. Be sure to tag us in your pictures and video at Refuse Fascism. If you want to support the show, spread the imperative and lend a hand by getting merch. See the show notes for that link, or join our Patreon community to fuel refusal of this fascist nightmare for as little as $2 a month. Visit patreon.com/refusefascism, or make a one-time contribution. Visit refusefascism.org and hit the donate button, or Venmo refuse-fascism. And for no money, you can help spread this show by sharing it with others, rating and reviewing on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, or commenting on our socials or YouTube. It makes a difference and is so appreciated. Connect with us on social media at Refuse Fascism, including on Blue Sky. Find us on TikTok at Refuse Fascism, where fascism is FASHIZM, to get around the TikToky rules. As always, thanks to Richie Marini, Lena Thorne, and Mark Tinkelman for helping produce the show. Thanks to incredible volunteers, we have transcripts available for each show, so be sure to visit refusefascism.org and sign up to get them in your inbox. Until next Sunday, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.